I'd like to welcome Arkadi Kuhlmann to the Ivey MBA Leadership Series. Arkadi, you've been known as a rebel in the financial services industry. A few examples that come to mind, riding a motorcycle in your freedom rides for charity, or asking your employees to vote for you to see if they want you to be their CEO again. Tell me how that all works as a leader in a pretty conservative industry.
Well, I think leadership is really something that you have to earn every day. And I think you have to be kind of authentic and accountable to the people that are going to work with you and are on the kind of journey to make something happen. Finding a way to connect with everyone in a kind of a positive way, you need a context. And so people need to understand who you are. You need to basically show that you're willing to be vulnerable, that you're willing to basically take personal risks, and that you're committed. And so people basically want to take note that you are the real person that you're pretending to be or demonstrating that you are. And you're asking other people to do the same thing. So getting everybody on the program is one of the first requirements of leadership. And some of the things that I try to do are maybe a bit unique, but other leaders do similar things, and they make it happen.
You've got a new book coming out called Rock Then Roll. And I know you said a lot of it has to do with cultures. Yes. And you're renowned for the Orange Code and for developing a very strong culture in your company. Tell me about that and what you think the role of the leader is in making sure the culture is what you want it to be.
Well, an interesting thing, about culture is that the leadership styles that basically may be applicable today are a little different than they used to be. It's an evolving kind of sort of thing, the way society evolves, and our society is becoming more and more diverse, and people bring different behaviors and different values into every situation. A good leader now has to actually be sensitive to those situations and figure out how to deal with them and sort of bring them together and find what the common bases are. So the challenges for leadership are a little bit more difficult than they used to be. And if you think about a military type leadership where everything is very regimented, the kind of qualities of leadership are pretty classic and they're pretty easy to understand. But in most business situations now, in organization situations in society, that's not the kind of homogeneous makeup we have. And so someone that is very open to ideas, very comfortable with different ideas, having experienced different backgrounds and having an empathy for the challenges of the way people interpret certain things is one of the real big requirements that a leader needs. For ING Direct, we've started with a clean sheet of paper, and the question was, well, what kind of character or culture should we try to create? And we basically emulated things, and in our case, we decided to take a lot of Dutch kind of characteristics, and we pulled them together. And it was kind of unique if you think about it. We had a Canadian management team with Dutch shareholders operating in a U.S. marketplace. And there were questions about, well, what was your background? Well, it could be maybe Spanish or French or English or whatever. And we tried to find a common way to synthesize that. One of the great things that I remember from Ivey in terms of the study of leadership was making sure that you can actually pull things together and understand where the key breaking points are. And the key breaking points are that you need to have positive bright spots for people to focus on and say, look, all those things are really important and we take those into account, but here's what we're going to accomplish together. And doing that in a thoughtful way is really an important way of dealing with the culture that we have.
How did you learn that?
I think one of the most interesting things, at least in my personal experience, was that I actually really love people. And I am by nature a teacher or a coach. I think if you come from that kind of a character or personality background, you tend to focus very much on people. And you really want to learn about people. You have a curiosity about them. And even though I'm very task-oriented and very driven to get a result, I constantly basically think about and care about the people dimensions of the people around me. And those people that work with me know that I have a great love for them as individuals. And I tend to show that. I tend to be very open about that. And that open commitment to people is what I think is, at the end of the day, that makes the task worthwhile. Some leaders are very results driven and they say, look, winning is what it's all about, and people basically get pretty happy about being on a winning team. I understand that. But there's different ways of going about that, and not all styles are effective in all situations. you have to find a very unique way. Now in my industry, it's the financial service industry, which is very conservative in many ways, not in all, but in some. If you want to be a challenger and you want to do things differently, then you can't define winning the same way as you would maybe in a technology company, you know, where your product is the win, for example. And so really then it's about the character of the organization and the culture, and you bring that about by getting people to behave and think differently than they normally do.
Now I find the title of your new book intriguing, Rock, Then Roll. What does that mean?
Well, I think it's sort of what we do at Ivey. If you think about our education, it's really about looking at the facts in front of you and finding how can we basically make things different? How can we innovate? How can we basically move things forward for the better of all stakeholders? And so one of the first priorities of anybody that wants to lead, right, is think about how you're going to rock things. You know, how are you going to shake things up a little bit? How are you going to come up with a better plan and a new plan? And you challenge yourself and you challenge the people around you. And then your obligation as a leader, of course, is to sell it, right, and get it rolling. And, you know, sometimes it seems maybe very simple, but sometimes people sort of forget what this is all about. It's not about just making money. It's not just about, you know, your own agenda, right? It's actually about what the enterprise is all about. And if you think about what's happening in society, not only here in Canada, but also in other countries around the world is changing with communications, with technology, with social media, and we're in a new revolution that's just starting called protest. And if we're going to be good business leaders, right, then we need to basically get on the side of protesting for the principles and things that we really believe in, and then we have to actually talk about them. And we have to actually stand behind them, and we got to shake it up a little bit. So while in the old days we used to just hang out and rock and roll and have a good time, maybe now we got to rock and then we got to get rolling.
That's interesting. Now, the other thing I know about you is that you took a different stance with financial services in the U.S. Essentially, you took on the establishment by saying that Americans aren't saving enough, they need to be saving more. You got involved with governments. You really took a message which turned out to be true, that Americans weren't saving enough. Right. But tell me how that happened and how you got involved with government and whether you think that's important for leaders to understand if they're going to lead businesses.
Well, I think, Carol, I think you're absolutely right. One of the great things that I remember from my case writing studies and the studies that I did as a student, I know it goes back a long ways, but think about this. We studied different industries, and we always looked about, well, what can we learn from this case in this industry, in this situation, and apply it somewhere else? It was always about trying to find learnings that you could transport. And so when I thought about what we could do differently in banking, I didn't look to banking to try to find the answers in banking. I actually looked at retailing, and I looked at transportation. I said, how do these people, the winners in those industries, how do they operate and how do they function? And could I take some of those ideas and bring them to banking? And so, and in retail banking, that was really important. And so we really tried to operate a retail bank like one would operate a retailer that's maybe selling merchandise or something else. And that discipline I really got in terms of as a student thinking about different industries. And that got two things going. One is it got you to be noticed, and it forced you to be the challenger, because it wasn't then about doing it like everybody else and just doing it better. It was about basically changing the way it got done. And in a regulated industry, and we have that in Canada, as in every other country in the industry, you've got to basically then not only think about your customers and your stakeholders, but also the government, because the government is the one that drives the policies and it drives the overall framework, right? And so whatever you're going to change, you're going to have to convince them that this is positive for the industry as a whole. So the role of the challenger was not basically to just sort of, you know, get a response from the rest of the industry and move it forward, but was really basically to say, are there some policy changes, are there some new guidelines, you know, that should be done that are actually in the interest of the industry long term. So there's a bigger responsibility on the challenger, not just to kick the can over, but make sure that kicking the can over, you come up with a solution that actually has some good long term. And so getting Americans to save, for example, sounds pretty simple, but getting Americans, for instance, to do mortgages better and differently in America, as we're doing in Canada, right, would have actually avoided the mortgage crisis. And so policy people in Washington are listening and saying, wait a minute, maybe we should look at other countries in terms of how they're doing it, and maybe that works, and I'm right in there saying, well, wait a minute, I'm a Canadian, let me show you how we do it in Canada, and I think we've got some lessons here that we can actually use. So I believe that a challenger is not just against the competition in terms of trying to win the competition or beat the competition at something for some period of time, but actually doing good in the larger social context.
What are some of the toughest challenges you had as a leader? And I'm thinking now about, you know, you have a very different leadership style. I would say you're not the typical stereotype that maybe some of our students think about in a leader. So it can't always have been easy. You must have had times where you were being questioned or maybe even questioning yourself. But when you think about your leadership style and everything you had to do to shake up the industry or to create that culture, to do things differently, what are some of the tough things that you had to do?
Well, probably two things come to mind, Carol. Number one is sort of the difference between dating and marriage. You know, I mean, you can't screw up a 4-hour date, you know, and it's a pretty defined moment, and it can be a pretty good outcome, and you can be on your best behavior, and, you know, you can have a good time. But, you know, making a marriage work is a longer period, and you have plenty of opportunities to screw up. And I think that was hard when you're trying to be a challenger and you're a leader, and I've been a leader for quite a long period of time. You know, you have a really hard time, like, sticking with it and not getting bored or not getting off the line, right, or becoming erratic, right? And so staying consistent and always setting the example and not deviating and always performing, right, is really a tough thing to do. The second big thing that comes to mind now that I've done it is that you have to take risks on people. You know, forming a team for a short period of time is one thing, but the longer you work together and the more robust you want to make the team, or however bigger you want to make the team, you run into the real personality problems. You know, people's ideas change, loyalties change, and it is heartbreaking when someone is very close to you that you've sort of stood in battle with, right, and then ends up betraying you or betraying the mission. And I think most leaders are not prepared for, you know, the betrayals of someone close to them. And those are the nights of heartache, those are the disappointments, and you can't help but feel that you failed in some way. It's much like a professor sort of seeing a good student somehow fail, and you kind of think, well, maybe I should have done a better job somehow, right? And you take a big responsibility. But it's emotionally racking when that happens.
When did you know that you were a leader? We have a big debate around the school about can you make leaders or are they born leaders? Was there ever a point in time in your career where you just knew that you're going to lead, and if so, when was that?
I knew quite early on that I was a leader, not in the context that you and I would think about now in terms of sort of a corporate leader, but even as a young boy, right? You know, when there was a question about who wants to take this on, right, my hand was always up first. I mean, when it got down to whatever the task was, right, I mean, I always jumped in. I had a natural inclination to want to jump in. And I think that basic characteristic, there's lots of different characteristics, but, you know, a leader in any personality sense has to be one that wants to basically get into it, you know, is going to get into the conversation, you know, is going to grab the dream, you know, is want to take the risk, right, get in the race. I think you've got to do that, and I don't think there's any other way around that. Doesn't matter what your leadership style is, whether it's participatory or autocratic or however you want to define it, you've got to have that. But I think when you have that, there's a lot that can be done to develop it. You know, think of it as the raw diamond. So I guess my answer is you have to have the raw diamond. Without that, you're not going to make it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you know, the world doesn't all have to be, you know, leaders in the sense, because a lot of us are leaders in certain ways and we're not leaders in other ways, right? So it's very contextual, I think. But then I think there's a real opportunity to polish that diamond. And I think if you're very smart and if you get good mentoring, then you'll be with a good coach and you'll be in a good environment, whether that could be an early job environment or colleagues or a senior colleague, right, that'll take you under his or her wing, right, and polish, you know, you a little bit, right, and basically bring you to a form where you can be very effective. And the other thing that I think comes out of this big leadership question, whether you're born or made, is the question about how good of a follower you are. You know, people always say, well, we're always looking for the leaders, right? But I know some of the most successful people are actually followers. You know, and And every good leader will tell you is that, you know, I've done a part of it, right? But there's a lot of people right behind me that have actually finished it, you know? And I think that, you know, while I think it's important to recognize the leaders, everybody basically knows that, that there's a team around it, and that I think successes belong kind of to everyone.
Now, I asked you about what was the toughest part of leadership. I'm going to ask the opposite question. What has been the most rewarding part of leadership for you?
The most rewarding part of leadership for me is the sort of really perennial question of, you know, why am I here? Why did my life make a difference? When I'm gone, will I have left things better than they were before? And I think it's given me the opportunity to give as much as I can out of my potential, you know. And so, you know, I've been pretty clear about this, is that I don't know how my life went. It went on a certain path. It could have gone totally different ways, but the leadership opportunities that I've had and that I've been then given by others, you know, has been a great opportunity for me, for which I'm greatly indebted, and I work hard at giving back for that. But it's actually allowed me to give more of what I think I was meant to do than if I was not a leader.
My last question for you, any advice you would give our students who are watching us today?
Well, for the students, Carol, today is basically to maybe two things. One you already know because we've talked about in the past, which is think more of Renaissance and the liberal, you know, view of the arts, right? I think you need to know something about music and literature and dancing a salsa and making a souffle, and because I think at the end of the day, whatever your personality is, right, you need to basically fulfill that in terms of, you know, other things in your life, right? It is important for you to be a larger, rounded individual, right? Because people, as a leader, are always going to want to know right off the bat, who are you? What do you do? What are you all about? What are your ideas? What are your thoughts? And you need to have that fabric built, right? And so whatever your interests are, you've got to basically make sure you fulfill those and keep those pretty constant. I think that's pretty important. The second thing for new leaders and people starting is you've got to get passionate about something. If you want to change the environment, you want to change buildings, you want to, whatever it is that you think that you have an interest in, right, you've got to be pretty clear about that passion, and you've got to basically be determined to go after it. I just don't think it happens anymore that you can sort of crawl up a ladder of anything. You know, I think we have now a world of disconnected ladders, you know, and I think you're going to jump from one rung to a total another ladder. And you're only going to be able to do that if you say, you know, I'm following a dream, or I'm following a passion, you know, and I'm following something that I want to do. So I would say put that as the first priority, and try to keep into a bit of a humble context the idea about, well, you know, here's a job I'm going to get with whoever. You know, I mean, I understand that's the reality, and we all got to go through that, but there's still this other part that's much more important, because when you sit down and talk to someone and said, I'd like to lead this division or this product, or I'd like this, they're going to say, and why should you be doing that? And the answer you're going to want to give is because you've got some passion or some real interest in the subject.
Thanks, Arkadi. I really appreciated you spending the time with us, and on behalf of all our students, a big thank you.
Well, it's very nice to be here. Thank you very much, Carol.